Hello and welcome to the Foundations of Computer Design. My name is Brian Scotto and I'm really excited to take you through this course. We're going to start from the ground up, assuming almost no knowledge, and show you how computers really work. I find that a lot of people, including some professional programmers or IT experts in the field, don't really have a good understanding of how computers really work. And I think this knowledge is very beneficial as you grow your career to understand what the computer's really doing. Sometimes when you're solving really difficult problems with computers, it helps to know what's really going on in the background so you can be more effective in your troubleshooting. When it comes down to it, computers are actually really simple. They just use electricity and these things known as logic gates that the electrical engineers have given us, combined together to represent things in many different states. We can use just 5 different logic gates to build all sorts of different circuits that ultimately allow us to program a computer to do things like addition, subtraction, and save things off in a special circuit that we call memory. A lot of people are pretty familiar with the basic components of a computer, the central processing unit and your RAM or your memory, but there's a lot of confusion about what actually goes on. When you ask somebody to describe how a computer works, they'll often tell you something like, oh, it's a bunch of ones and zeros, or some statement like that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. In this class, we're going to go through what that actually means, and by the end of this class, you'll be able to, at least on paper, design a working and programmable computer that does some very useful things like adding and subtracting numbers and saving things to memory and retrieving them for later use. We're not going to cover real programming in this class. That'll come in a class I produce later, but this class will show you the basics of CPU design. We're also not going to cover in this class some of the more advanced computer design concepts. It gets pretty tricky when you try to optimize a computer to minimize its use of power and to minimize the amount of heat it generates, or to make it as fast as possible. The computer we're going to design is relatively slow compared to today's computers, but it's also a lot easier to understand, and it's possible to draw on paper, and we'll be able to show it on the slides in this video. This course starts out very basic, and the first lecture is fairly slow paced, but the pace picks up very quickly. I don't cover topics more than once to cut down on the amount of time that you have to sit through my lecture, but if you miss something, and it may be something subtle, you may find that you start to get lost as we move through the classes, and this is not unusual. I don't always emphasize every point that we're building, but if you go back and review prior to where you got lost, or ask me questions, I think you'll be able to pick up and continue with the lecture. This class is listed at right at 2 hours, and there's a lot of material in that 2 hours, and I don't often repeat things, and sometimes important points are just briefly mentioned. I did this on purpose because you can go back and review the lectures as many times as you would like, so I don't waste your time by repeating things over and over. If you do get stuck, don't feel bad. Go back and review the previous lecture again, or take a break and come back to the class when your mind is feeling fresh. It's a lot to take in if you've never experienced this stuff before. Also, feel free to ask me questions. I'll do my best to be available and help you along in the course and answer any questions you've got. This was one of my favorite subjects in college, and I look forward to sharing it with you. I really don't think it's that difficult to understand. It just takes some time and the ability to let your mind think differently than it ever has before. And sometimes that can be difficult to do. But if you stick with it, I think you'll learn things that are useful to your career. So let's get started.